Welcome back to Questing Beast. I am Ben. Today we're taking a look at Dungeon Crawl Classics number 100. The music of the spheres is chaos. This is, as you can see by the number here, the 100th official adventure for Dungeon Crawl Classics. It's a bit strange that it's taking me so long to get around to these. I think my channel has been around for 10 years or so, and I think this is the first Dungeon Crawl Classics adventure that I have reviewed, although I did do the book as one of the first reviews I ever did, actually. This is a box set. Here is the back of our box here. One of the big features is that it has this sort of gimmick where there is a revolving dungeon. So the configuration of the space changes as you play. And that is going to also accelerate the doom that is fast approaching. We'll take a look at how that works inside. Before we dig any further though, a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Dim Day Red. Dim Day Red is a mid-apocalyptic RPG dealing with the last days of life in the doomed world of New Bonn. Notice 2, the second of 5 zines, is currently on Kickstarter and features 68 pages and an unfolding gold-printed cover with a huge map of the Hochberg slum adventure. After last year's successful quick start, this year Dim Day Red comes back bigger and darker with lovingly crafted extras to immerse players into its dystopian, socially divided world. An extended offer of a free set of custom dice for all physical backers is still available. Check it out on Kickstarter using the link below. A big shout out to Dim Day Red for sponsoring the video, and now let's get back to the adventure. The game comes with this huge map, though it's really a board that you can set up the revolving dungeon on. It's so big I can't really fit it in camera. But as you can see, there is a number of different zones that correspond to certain zodiac symbols. You have like the goat and the lion and the wolf and the serpent or the worm down here. And you'll be setting up your dungeon in the middle like so. There is a central area that you're going to enter through up here like that. And there is a number of smaller dungeons that are going to be around the edges. If I have this right, we have fire over here, we have a little earth dungeon over here, and a water dungeon over here. And as the players explore this thing, well, before they get in actually, they're going to find this little handout, this key. And right now it has the void symbol pointing down towards the worm, which is the zone at the bottom over here. We can see that at the very bottom. And if the players take this and they rotate it, for example, if they go like this, then two things happen. We rotate this whole thing 90 degrees. So the whole thing would move like this. The circles would move with it. And then after it has rotated, all of the mini dungeons would then rotate 180 degrees. That would go like that. This one would go like that. And the bottom would go down like that. So there's only two possible configurations for these smaller dungeons. Either they're facing inward, right, where there's entrance is pointing towards the center, or they're facing outward. And then this bigger one has 4 different positions it can basically be in. One slightly annoying thing about this particular map that I was sent, or this box, is that I'm pretty sure there's got to be a way to connect these things to the actual map, right? There's a hole in the board right there to connect that. And there is like holes in this thing where this would connect on. But at least in my box set, I don't seem to have any connectors to put it together. So unless I'm missing something, which is kind of irritating, there's no way to actually hold this together and I have to move it just physically with my hands. Maybe the box set's supposed to come with those, not totally sure. Now, as the players explore this particular dungeon, they're going to want to keep rotating it for a number of reasons. One, it's going to allow you to get to places you couldn't get to otherwise, right? If you were in the fire area before, and then you rotated up to here and this spun around, now you're in this area where you can now escape up to this zone up at the top. But also, now these two passageways align with this and you can get to this new area. There's a number of situations like that. Like over here, for example, where once this is rotated, then this passageway loops around to there, when if it's in this configuration, you can't get to there at all. The other big reason, though, is that each of these different 4 zones that you can be in, these different zodiac signs, each correspond to a number of special bonuses that are related to it. So, for example, the lion over here, monsters all get +2 dice. I think that means moving up the dice chain to attacks, damage, and saves, and +5 armor class. Warriors and dwarves get -1 die. Traps get +2 dice to thieves' attempts to find or disarm traps. And like clerics get -1 die to spell checks. Wizards and elf spells are +1 die to spell checks. So there's different configurations or different bonuses and penalties depending on which of the zones that you're in. So if you find a particular area is difficult and maybe you have a bunch of wizards, you want to rotate the whole dungeon so that this little mini dungeon is in the zone where wizards have more of an advantage. However, there is another twist, which is that every time this particular dial is changed to a new direction, and you have to rotate this, whether you're rotating it a quarter or 360 degrees, whatever, anytime you make one of these turns, the dungeon gets more dangerous. Because in the center here, this is like a giant spherical cavern. And at the very bottom of it is raw, boiling chaos being mixed with earth, fire, and water elements being poured into it from these dungeons. And as you rotate this mystical alembic, it's like an alchemical flask that's mixing materials. As you rotate the whole thing, it matures or takes this raw boiling chaos to its final form, and it gets more and more dangerous and starts spitting out these creatures that you now have to fight that are getting more and more deadly. So from the player's point of view, the question becomes, can we solve this dungeon? Can we find the treasure? Can we defeat the bad guy and escape without rotating the dungeon too many times and getting it to a really dangerous state where it wipes us all out and possibly destroys the whole world? This whole giant map and all of these handouts are actually really cool. I love how visual it is. While I was reading the book, it made it much easier to figure out what was going on because I could physically move things around and examine the different parts of it. One downside, though, is that this thing is really big. If it's going to be of any use to the dungeon master, then the whole thing is going to have to be behind their GM screen, or it's going to give away everything to the players. And that's going to be tricky to do because this is quite large. So you're going to have a lot of space behind your GM screen, maybe a really big GM screen to fit all of this, plus your books and your dice and your miniatures and everything else in order to run the game. How you're going to explain to players exactly where they are and what things look like is going to be tricky because how are you going to draw this map on a big, square map out in the middle of the table for them to move miniatures around? Maybe they're not going to move miniatures around. Maybe they'll do pure theater of the mind. But in that case, it's going to be very hard to describe where they are and what things look like because the dungeon is always shifting. It could be a little bit of a challenge to play. Another cool thing about this book is that it has handouts, lots of handouts. It really reminds me of things like the Tomb of Horrors, where there is lots and lots of pictures that you can show your players as they explore the dungeons. That's a great way to get a visual on what's going on. And it's a great way for me to summarize the kinds of things that you're going to see as you explore this place. Things start out fairly normal, but it gets weirder and weirder. So here's your view as you walk down into the Great Alembic. You walk down here and you can see the steps continue to descend to this little island, and it splits off in 3 directions. And this giant cavern, it goes deep, deep, deep down into the earth and it's full of this boiling raw chaos. There's all sorts of weird monsters and traps, strange situations that you can get into. Lots of great art from classic Dungeon Crawl Classics artists. Here are some of the void creatures that are going to be boiling out of this pit and getting more and more dangerous as things evolve forward, up to the possibility of it bursting forth from this temple and destroying the entire campaign setting. All right, let's dig into the book itself. The book is about 100 pages long or so, although there's a lot of credits and ads and stuff at the back. And my main issue, I think, with this whole adventure is that it often has great writing in the sense that it's entertaining to read. There's evocative descriptions, but similar to a lot of Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures that I've flipped through in the past, although I haven't reviewed, there is a lot of text. There is definitely a wall of text syndrome going on here, where I feel like some of these adventures have not caught up to the kind of modern OSR standards of how you describe rooms and events in these dungeon adventures. When the adventure starts out, you really need a way to get players interested in that there is this awful dungeon at the edge of the universe on top of this mountain. And the clues pointing towards that are on these sheets of paper, which are in the handouts. They provide clues and you have to cut them up or fold them in particular ways to read these clues. So it's a nice little puzzle there. Once they put that together, they'll know where to go. And if they don't pick that up right away, then you can have this group of cultists attack them in a bar and demand to get the pieces of the scroll back so that they know that it's important. Now, this is really a good example of the kind of encounter or room description that I'm talking about here, where the fight in one particular room, you're in here and a bunch of cultists attack, takes up an entire page of text. 2 whole columns. In fact, it's more than 2 columns. And we see that as we go through the dungeon as well. Sometimes you have an entire page or more of text describing what is happening in one room. And for me, that is just way too much. This information could be dramatically condensed down to half or even a third of its current size with better formatting and with more attention to what the game master actually needs to know at the table. Here's a map of the actual temple at the edge of the world that you're going to be traveling to, and it has a map down here. The artwork is really great. I think it's mostly done by Doug Kovacs, who is really fantastic. I also like how there's a lot of design diaries where the creator of the adventure explains how he came up with it, the historical process of writing it, the decisions that he made. That's really great. I love to see that sort of thing. The beginning of the adventure takes place out in the on top of the mountain in front of the temple. And there's a bunch of different things that you can discover. There's some frozen corpses that have more pieces of the scroll. You can start encountering these ice spiders, which you'll see more of once you get down into the dungeon. And a lot of these areas, they have names, but these names are only in the text in the book. They're not written on the map, which would be enormously helpful, since they often have like these long codes where sometimes it's things like area 0-1B. Why is it called that when it simply could be called the corpse in the cave? Put that on the map and it's going to be much easier to reference. It's going to be a lot easier to understand what's happening. Here's an example of a trap, which is a good idea in concept. There is a big rift in the ground right there. And as you stare down into the rift, you can see that there's a lot of treasure and artifacts down there that's deeper and deeper, things that have fallen down. And so that's a great idea for a concept, for a trap, because there's a lure. Players have to risk themselves. How much risk do they want to take, etc. But the description of it goes on for multiple pages. That's just not necessary. There's a lot of, if they try to do this, it's a difficulty class of 5. If they do this, difficulty class 10. If this, difficulty class 15. It's the sort of thing that any competent referee would be able to make up on their own. There's no reason to put it into the text. Sometimes rooms have whole explanations for what the room is and what it was in the past and what happened here 100 years ago, things that players are often never going to be able to find out. It'll go through round by round what the monsters are going to do. It'll say, if the players try and do this, then you can do this. But if they're not thinking so well, then they might try and do this, in which case you should do this. There's just so much hypotheticals that are worked out and explained that are just unnecessary. I think that all should be cut. Things that are important in a particular room description should be bolded so that you can immediately find it. Maybe you can use boxes to pull things like stat blocks off to the side. Things should be organized with bullet points so that what is obvious is immediately clear and what is hidden can be in a bullet point underneath it, so that when you read a description, you know what to tell players right away and you know what to only tell them when they investigate. All of that stuff is just kind of jumbled up in a lot of these passages. So you often have to read a whole column or 2 columns or 3 columns before you can really start describing to the players what's going on. Now, that being said, there are a lot of really fun ideas in here. And that's something that I've seen in a lot of Dungeon Crawl Classics adventures that I've looked at in the past. You have like these doors you need to get through into the 3 different elemental zones. For example, there's this wall of water that's going to cause a lot of damage if you push through it. But if anything magical, like a wizard or an elf, touches it, it just splashes open like this in this portal formation, which is very cool. There's a fire door that's going to burn you unless a warrior touches it. There is a door of earth, which of course is good for thieves to try and pick, although there's traps involved with that. I would like to see more situations in the adventure where it's really up to the players to come up with creative solutions to problems. There are a lot of traps and situations where something has happened. Make a, dexterity roll. And if you fail, you take damage, right? And there's a lot of that. For example, there's an area in the dungeon where you pass from one zone of the zodiac to another. There's kind of an invisible barrier there. And if you cross over it, if you fail a save, you just take a whole bunch of damage. And there's not a lot that you can really do about it. This happens a number of times throughout the adventure. When you have enough situations like that, it starts feeling just very arbitrary, and players are not going to be poking around and thinking as much, and they're just going to try and protect themselves because they never know what's going to happen. It's going to feel random. There are some exceptions to that, though. For example, there's a really fun little maze area here where you walk around this area that has a lot of up and down passages, and it's very Escher-esque. Like you can go down, and then you find you're back where you started again. And the puzzle here is that there is this thing stalking you. You can hear it stalking you. And every time you go down some steps, it gets closer. And every time you go up some steps, it gets further away. And you can indicate that by the noises that it's making. So if players pay attention to what's going on and how the sounds are getting louder and quieter, they can figure out the clue to defeating this thing. Now, each of the 3 elemental spheres has a number of traps and encounters in it, but there's always an elemental lord near the end of it. So a powerful, Ifrit from fire over here. There's like a water elemental type guy. There's a king of stone in the earth area. And they all have a number of encounters that you can either fight with them, you can talk with them, you can negotiate with them. They often want things. And that's really great because it often sets up exploration if they want something else in the dungeon or they want you to mess with one of the different elemental lords. There's kind of a faction play going on there that I really enjoy. The earth area in particular has some fun traps, like there is a large circular pit that you can climb down because there's a spiral staircase going down into it. But once you get too low, it sets off a trap where a giant circular boulder rolls over and then plummets down into the pit and crushes you. That's sort of a very classic D&D Tomb of Horrors type stuff. Although I think there should probably be more clues to how dangerous things are. Maybe that's more of a Dungeon Crawl Classics thing where it expects more total party kills. But a lot of the danger in the dungeon is not telegraphed exceptionally well. So I would probably add more clues so that players can use their brains a bit more to overcome some of the obstacles. The Sphere of Water has some really great sights to see as well. There's a big room where there's tons of these heads of members of cults from around the world going back hundreds of years. And they're all chanting together, helping to bring this chaos being from the middle alembic into reality. And you can try and join in with them, or you can try and shut it down by destroying the heads or chopping down the crystal in the center of the chamber that is vibrating and powering the ascent of chaos. I love how there's this weird demiurge creature over here that you can fight, and every time it's his turn, you roll 6 times on the godhead action, and something will happen. So he has a very random set of moves, makes him very unpredictable. You could just be howling things like, "Do you not know who I am?" Or perhaps a black cone erupts from the face's mouth. That does a bunch of damage. Near the back of the book, there is a chart of how the star rot, which is the chaos being that's coming into being, how that evolves over time. So there's a little checklist down here. This table goes on to the next page as well. So each time you make that rotation, you can make another check mark. And the number of rotations is over here. And then the initiative, the attack, the AC of these chaos beings is going to change over time and generally get worse. Initially, there can only be 3 of these chaos spawn at a time, but eventually there can be 10. And then they start getting really powerful special abilities, like they can start counterspelling spells. The gods begin to shrink from the growing horror of the Theophage's monster. Clerics suffer a -1 die penalty when using divine powers around them. If you get all the way down to 15, the star rock crawls from the alembic, cracks open the monastery, and flies out to destroy the world. In its very final form, it's kind of a Tiamat-style multi-headed dragon, each of which has a head for fire, earth, water, and void. There's another appendix at the back. I'm not really sure how useful it is. It's the 5 splinter cults. So these are 5 important cults in the setting. I guess you could use these for background material. A lot of it is just lore and information on what the cult is about, what they want, where they live, that sort of thing. So I guess you could incorporate it into your setting, but it's not terribly useful for this particular adventure. So I was a little confused as to why it was there. I guess it's just bonus material. And that's the music of the spheres as chaos. As usual, I'll put links down in the description below where you can pick this up. I am kind of torn on this one. The art, of course, is great. It has a great map, although it'd be nice if it had the room names on it. And there's just a lot of imagination in terms of the sights and sounds, and just there's a sense of awe to it, which I think Dungeon Crawl Classics is very much known for. You get to see weird stuff and encounter weird things. However, there is a lot of elements to it that feels like it's written, 20, 30 years ago in terms of how the actual dungeon is written. If I was to run this myself, I would feel like I would have to do a lot of editing in terms of bolding stuff, highlighting stuff, rearranging text in order to make it much more usable at the table. Dungeon Crawl Classics could really up their game and take their adventures to the next level and make them really world-class if they adopted a more modern style of presentation in terms of how they structure their adventures. In any case, that's it for me. Thanks for watching, everybody, and I'll see you next time.